Hello folks, today is for both year groups. So today is revising changing places, which is useful for year 2 students and also for year 1 students. We've just finished this module, so this is meant as a bit of a summary of the key ideas, because some people in human geography can get a little bit lost, and I just thought this would help you. Okay, so the module is called Changing Places, and I've got the photographs of Princess Hay in Exeter to try and get that idea across to you. And if you get lost in all the waffle, just come back to this idea. Places change. They change for lots of different reasons in lots of different ways, but that's what the module is all about. Okay, so the first thing that you need to know is, what does a place mean? The first bullet point is what your exam board define as a place. A ward is a government area. It's based on voting, and if you're not sure, I'd have a Google search, or it's the first part of a postcode. So for your exam board, anything smaller than that, so like your house is not big enough to be a place, and a county is too big, so they're quite specific about the size of what a place actually is. But geographically speaking, a place is a location that has meaning. Okay, so Richard Tewich College is a sixth form college in Taunton, and it's where people get their A-levels and get educated. That's a shared meaning, because everybody that works or studies at Hewish, that's what it means to them. A contested meaning, we usually use Stonehenge as an example, because the idea of a contested meaning is that different groups of people have different ideas about the exact same place, and that means that they can start to fall out about it. Okay. Places have a character, just like people do, and there's a range of factors. I'm not going to go through them all because they're in your module booklet, but it's things like who lives there, the physical geography, external linkages, the history, and I've put it in red because fundamentally what the module comes back to is the idea that that character can change, particularly because of who lives there. So people are very migratory, people move around a lot. We talk about that in global governance, and if people move, it changes who lives in a place. That is going to have a fundamental effect on the character. Okay, so I'm not going to revise everything to do with migration, because that's really emphasised in a different module. But I want to talk to you about the life cycle model. Now, this is not technically on the syllabus, but I explain it to my classes just because I think it really helps you with this module. Okay, so you can see this arrow, this really long arrow. When somebody gets to kind of late teens, early 20s, if they've grown up in a small suburbanised village, we'll explain what that is later on, but if you've grown up in a small village, when you get to your late teens, 20s, you might move in to a town or a city to go to university, to get a job, to find a flat to rent, all of those kinds of things. And because of that, we find that inner city areas tend to have lots of young people. They've got a very different character because of that. This second arrow here, this is for suburbanisation. I don't know if I said this is urbanisation, so this is young people moving to the city for jobs, education, nightlife, etc. This is suburbanisation, when people want to settle down. Maybe you get to your 20s, 30s and you want to think about a different priorities in life. Maybe you're thinking about having kids or getting loads of dogs or something like that. So you move to maybe a slightly bigger house in the suburbs, quieter life. You don't need to be near the pubs and clubs. You can afford a nicer house, etc. This arrow is counter-urbanisation, and what some people do in their sort of 40s, 50s is they want a quieter life. They want a big garden. They might want to be able to drive back to work in the city, but have a nice quiet life in the evenings and weekends. So you generally find older people living out in the countryside. And then this final arrow is re-urbanisation. Traditionally, it's been people towards the end of their life wanting to be back in the inner city because they want to be near public transport, health facilities, they might not be able to drive anymore, that kind of thing. Okay, so urbanisation, suburbanisation, counter-urbanisation, re-urbanisation, they will all affect who lives in different places, and that will affect the character, just to give you a bit of an idea. Okay, function. The function of me is to teach you geography. So function is kind of why do you exist, what's your purpose. Places have a function. So some places are administrative centres, some places are residential, that sort of thing. Don't get too bogged down in this. Again, have a Google if you're not too sure. Places can be rural or urban. Now, at A level, we can't really just say rural or urban. We need to distinguish that. And urban areas have a CBD, an inner city, inner suburbs and outer suburbs. In your module, you should have kind of talked about what those differences are, be able to recognise them, that kind of thing. Now, this is probably the weirdest lesson in the whole module. It's about representation. I tend to try and get it across by talking about you and social media, or me, just humans and social media. What you choose to put about yourself on social media is going to be different to the day-to-day reality of what your life is like, just because we choose generally to represent the best version of ourselves, not necessarily the absolute warts and all kind of version. That's exactly the idea with representation of places. Formal representations generally are better. They want, you know, the tourist board wants you to see a place as glossy and wonderful and everything's peachy. And then you might read somebody's blog about living there, which might go on about crime and traffic congestion and seagulls and stuff. So representations can contradict one another. It's a bit of a strange lesson, but as long as you've got the basic concept, you should be fine. Now, we get to my favourite bit, the Clark-Fisher model. Oh, how I love the Clark-Fisher model. I think it's worth being able to draw this, just because I think it helps you out with everything that we do in the rest of the module. Primary sector is farming, fishing, forestry, mining. It's the people who are involved in getting their hands on raw materials. They were the first jobs to exist, which is why they're called primary. The secondary sector is making things, so it's manufacturing, so a builder, but also a factory. They were the second jobs. The tertiary sector is any form of service, so I am a teacher, education is a service. You can get beauticians, you can get accountants, lawyers, etc., etc. That came third. The quaternary sector, which is what yesterday's video was all about, comes fourth, and you only get that when a country has a certain standard of economic development and the education system is going to be pretty good. What I've put in slightly smaller text, just to give you a framework for the rest of the module really, as the economic sectors change over time, that then affects places. Okay, so I'll try to emphasise that as we go through. Very potted history of the UK. We started off with the primary sector being dominant back in the sort of 15, 16, 1700s. Then we had our Industrial Revolution, secondary sector. Since then we've had a process called de-industrialisation, which is where you lose your secondary sector. So we're looking at this bit. And that's because the factories have moved abroad. And in the background, notice that the tertiary sector just slowly gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And we just work our way through explaining each of these sectors for the rest of the module. Bit of a link to global governance briefly. Globalisation, which we learn about more in global governance, is the reason that the factories have left the UK. Now, because the cost of shipping is so low, thanks to containerisation, etc., etc., you can move your factory to a less developed country where you pay much less for your labour, your electricity, your rent, everything, really. And it's not going to cost you that much to ship your finished products back to the UK. So globalisation is all very much part and parcel of the Clark-Fisher model. And it also makes the point really nicely that the reason that you now take geography over 2 years and it's just examined at the end is the whole point, and this I suppose I'm emphasising for year 2 students, is exactly that you're supposed to start realising that all of these modules join together, because in the real world, globalisation is not a standalone concept. It kind of affects everything to do with your life. So the more that you can start to go, oh, that bit of global governance links with that bit of changing places, that's brilliant. So if you're beginning to do that, excellent, congratulations. So we've lost our secondary sector, and as a result of that, we get a process that you can either call the spiral of decline or the negative multiplier effect. We have spent some time talking about that. It basically means that everything goes wrong. You start to see social problems, you start to see environmental quality declining, people move away. It's a really awful process. You've also got some case studies to back that. We talk about case studies at the end. In some of these places, because the spiral of decline is so awful as a process, the government has tried to intervene and to try and help by creating jobs in various ways. Okay. Then we finish this part of the module by talking about something called inequality. Inequality comes up in year 1 and year 2. It's quite an important concept. Inequality is the gap between the haves and have-nots, and I'm not going to go into too much detail here. What I do want to emphasise today is that if you cannot remember what the Gini coefficient or a Lorenz curve is, could you make that a bit of a priority, please? You'll find it in your module booklet, you'll find them on the internet, but remember that in the first exam, you're going to get short questions about changing places, and they usually are based on a resource, a photograph, a pie chart, a map, whatever. I think that they could quite easily give you some Gini coefficient information or a Lorenz curve, and if you've forgotten or never heard what they are, that would obviously cause you a few difficulties. Now, I have got 15-minute limits on these videos, so we're nearly at 13. I'm going to stop here for today, well, not for today, for this video, and then I'll do another video where I carry on with the rest of the PowerPoint. Okay, see you in a minute.